Look at a map of New Guinea, the world's second largest island. You'll see a line almost too perfect, a straight border carved by outsiders. On one side, democracy. On the other, decades of military rule. One island, one people, two completely different destinies. This is a border the world rarely talks about, yet one that shapes global politics and even touches the devices many of us carry in our pockets. So, how did a single line on a map decide the fate of millions? And why does this forgotten frontier still matter so much in 2025? The division of New Guinea didn't begin with grand strategy. For tens of thousands of years, New Guinea was a world unto itself. New Guinea's remoteness, its rugged mountains and dense rainforests hosted 1,000 different cultures, speaking 1,000 languages. It's one of the world's most diverse places culturally. It's a factor that isolated groups and hindered the formation of a unified nation or empire. Then, in 1828, the Netherlands casually drew a line through the 141st meridian, claiming the western half of the island for their Dutch Indies Empire, following a treaty with Britain, who took the east. For decades, it was just ink on paper. The real fracture came in 1883, when Germany muscled in and staked their own claim to the northeastern part of the island, along with nearby territory, which competed with the Dutch and British interests. Germany established a protectorate, which rang alarm bells for the British, who subsequently proclaimed a protectorate over the northeast of New Guinea. Within months, 3 European empires had carved up an island they'd barely explored. The Dutch got the west, the British and Germans split the east. This arbitrary act set two halves of the same island on completely different paths. The two world wars brought more upheaval to the shores of New Guinea. After the outbreak of World War I, Australia invaded and occupied the former German New Guinea, which had been poached by the Germans 30 years earlier. After the war ended, Australia continued to administer control over the area. World War II brought volatile scenes to the island, with the Japanese invading parts of the landmass. This led to fierce fighting between the Allied and Japanese forces, with the Allied armies eventually regaining control. Throughout this period, the native islanders had little say over their future and suffered the consequences of foreign forces fighting in their homeland. After World War II, the Age of Empires was ending, but for New Guinea's people, this meant two radically different futures. The East got a path to independence. The West, they got thrown into a geopolitical vice. Here's the crucial difference. Australia now governed the Eastern Territories under UN trusteeship. The whole world was watching. Australia had legal obligations to prepare the inhabitants for self-government. The process was slow and paternalistic, but it was real. Indigenous leaders got their first taste of political power through an elected House of Assembly in 1964. International pressure and decolonization movements pushed a reluctant Australia to speed things up. In 1975, Papua New Guinea became independent, peaceful, imperfect, but free. Meanwhile, the West was being primed for something very different. When Indonesia gained full independence in 1949 from the Netherlands, the Dutch held on to one piece, West New Guinea. Their argument? The Papuan people were ethnically different from Indonesians and deserved their own future. Indonesia's fiery nationalist ideas saw this as pure betrayal. For them, Dutch control meant an imperial dagger aimed at their new nation's heart. The Dutch actually began preparing West Papua for independence. They created a New Guinea Council in 1961 that declared its intention to become sovereign. But this was never going to be a fair fight. A much bigger game was being played, and the Papuan people were just pawns. So, why did the Dutch lose, and how did Indonesia's ambitions become successful? 2 words: Cold War. Indonesia's president, Sukarno, made a strategic move and declared he would liberate West Papua. Frustrated by failed diplomacy, he turned to the Soviet Union. The USSR flooded Indonesia with jets, warships, and weapons, publicly backing their claim to West New Guinea. This terrified the Kennedy administration in the United States. They didn't see a colonial dispute. They saw the domino theory in action. Indonesia controlled vital shipping lanes. If it fell into the Soviet orbit, the entire region might follow. The calculation was cold and simple. Keeping Indonesia friendly mattered more than self-determination for around 800,000 West Papuans. Freedom was sacrificed for containment. The US pressured their own NATO ally to abandon the colony, and in 1963, the Netherlands would hand control to a temporary UN authority, which would immediately transfer everything to Indonesia. The Dutch got one promise in return, one fig leaf to cover the mess being created. By 1969, Papuans would be provided a vote, known as the Act of Free Choice, to decide their future, remain under Indonesian control, or gain independence. It was a sacred promise, never meant to be kept. In 1969, the Act of Free Choice was a betrayal to the people of the region, political theatre directed by the Indonesian military with a predetermined outcome. To Papuans, it's actually known as the Act of No Choice. They were promised a vote for all adults, but Indonesia claimed local people were too primitive for democracy. Instead of nearly 1 million voters, they handpicked 1,026 tribal leaders to decide everyone's fate. These representatives were systematically bribed, intimidated, and threatened. Foreign journalists reported men held in camps for weeks, coached on what to say, and told their families would be harmed for voting incorrectly. The voting was widely regarded as a farce, no secret ballots, just shows of hands in rooms full of armed Indonesian soldiers. The result? Unanimous. All 1,026 delegates voted to join Indonesia. This is despite independent observers and the US ambassadors to Indonesia claiming 95% of Papuans wanted independence. The international community chose to look away. The Cold War problem was solved. A people's freedom was accepted as collateral damage. This rigged vote, it's the legal foundation of Indonesia's claim today. It's the poison fueling brutal conflict ever since. Today, that line represents a chasm in human existence. Papua New Guinea grapples with its destiny as a sovereign nation. Political instability, corruption, and systemic poverty plague the country. But these are internal problems being worked out, however painfully, in a boisterous democracy. Across that invisible line, the story is violent subjugation. The fraudulent election immediately birthed the Free Papua movement. For more than 50 years, they've waged guerrilla war for independence. Indonesia maintains brutal military occupation in response. Human rights groups estimate up to around 500,000 Papuans have been killed since the 1960s. The conflict continues to rage, and it's escalated again in 2024 and 2025, with the Indonesian authorities promising to clamp down on the Free Papua movement even harder. This has led to dozens of deaths, tens of thousands of people being displaced, and humanitarian groups claim helicopter gunships have been used by Indonesia, along with drones and methods of torture. However, the true number of deaths and extent to the conflict is thought to be far worse, with a media blackout and bans on the internet, meaning getting real-time information is incredibly challenging. On top of this, Indonesia's transmigration program moved hundreds of thousands of Javanese into West Papua. Critics call it deliberate demographic engineering, systematically marginalizing the indigenous community in their own land. But here's what makes this tragedy global. West Papua sits on some of the world's richest mineral deposits. The Grasberg mine in West Papua is one of the largest gold and copper mines on the planet. It produces approximately 770 million kilograms of copper annually and more than 56,000 kilograms of gold. That copper ends up in electric vehicles, smartphones, and renewable energy infrastructure worldwide. This isn't just historical injustice, it's active exploitation feeding global supply chains. The stakes have only grown higher as great powers compete for influence. The US signed defensive arrangements with Indonesia in 2023. China invested tens of billions of dollars in Indonesian infrastructure in 2024 and welcomed Indonesia into the BRICS group of countries recently too. West Papua remains a pawn in the US-China rivalry, its freedom sacrificed for geopolitical convenience, just as it was during the Cold War. New Guinea split because its halves were swept up by different historical forces. The East, caught in the post-war wave of UN-supervised decolonization and reached the shores of nationhood. Papua New Guinea still faces challenges and suffers from immense poverty, but it's at least in charge of its own path in the world. The West was dragged under by Cold War politics, sacrificed for American strategy and Indonesian nationalism. The ongoing, bloody occupation of West Papua stands as a monument to its most profound failure. That near-perfect straight line on your map of the island, it's not just a border, it's a visible reminder of the moment when geopolitical convenience mattered more than human freedom. The people of West Papua are still paying that price for the Cold War bargain. Their struggle continues, largely forgotten by the world that betrayed them, while their resources fuel the devices and technology many of us now use. One island, one people, divided. Hey, before you go, the YouTube algorithm thinks you're going to like this video next, so why not check it out?